Fortnite has added hundreds of items throughout the years, but some of them barely lasted long enough for anyone to use them. So today, I'm taking a look at every single item and feature that got removed in under 30 days, all the way down to just 27 minutes. And we're gonna start with number 37, Chiller Grenades. If you ever had someone use these against you, you probably realized very quickly how annoying they are. You'd lose complete control of your character and movement, and you could die to fall damage if you were near a cliff. Out of all of the short-lived items on this list, they actually lasted the longest at just 30 days. They were fun to troll people with, but really they weren't a very valuable item to pick up, and Epic probably noticed that and ended up vaulting them after just 1 month. At 36, we have another obscure one, Dial a Drop. A lot of players might not even remember this being in the game. It was added in Chapter 3, Season 4, and it was only in the game for 29 days. The Dial a Drop gave you multiple choices on what kind of drop you could ask for. Things like a vehicle drop, which would give you a modded truck, a health drop, or a normal supply drop. But when you use this item, it marked the drop for all of the players on the map and made it very easy to spot where you were. And if you picked the vehicle drop, you could actually accidentally damage your car while trying to break the balloon to get it to come down faster. It wasn't game changing, and I guess Epic thought it wasn't worth keeping. Just like number 35, the Boombox. These were very controversial at the time. They were really good at tearing down porta fortresses or just any builds in general. A lot of people felt like this was a no skill item, and Epic obviously added it as a way for casual players to counter the sweaty builders. But with building being the core of Fortnite at the time, because there wasn't any zero build, it was a very, very hated item. It even ended up ruining some tournament endgames. This one lasted 29 days in Season 7, and of course Epic removed them and never brought them back to Battle Royale. But on the day that they vaulted boomboxes, they introduced bottle rockets, which is number 34 on this list. Unlike the boomboxes, the bottle rockets were not as powerful. They were extremely situational and definitely not worth carrying in your inventory. If a squad was throwing multiple of these while you were boxed up, it was just extremely loud, but even multiple of them had a very hard time at actually hitting any player. They lasted in the game for 28 days before Epic removed them, and they sometimes pop up for events like the 14 Days of Summer or Lunar New Year's, but they just don't hit. They're not an actual item. They're more just for fun and trolling. At 33, we have the Snoop Drum Gun and the Double G Bomb. This one's kind of a no-brainer since this season only lasted 28 days long, but Snoop Dogg's Drum Gun and Double G Bomb were available during the launch of the season and were available for the entire season. Honestly, Epic cooked with the Chapter 2 remix. It was actually a really good time, even though a lot of people thought it wasn't going to be as good. People kind of clowned the idea of the rappers being the final bosses, but I thought they did it extremely well. At 32, we have the Explosive Batarang and Batman Grapple Gun. These were a part of the Fortnite X Batman crossover in Season X, and they both lasted only 25 days. They both got vaulted once the collaboration was over, and although they were vaulted, they recycled the mechanics of the Batman Grapple Gun and turned it into Jules' Glider Gun. And the Explosive Batarang had similarities to the Proximity Mine, but the tracking of Captain America's shield. Now, there are rumors of a new DC mode coming to Fortnite, so maybe we'll see these make a return. But at 31, we have the Eradicator Shock and Slow Shockwave Launcher. This is one of the newest items on the list. It was actually added this season in Chapter 6, Season 4, but it only lasted 25 days before Epic vaulted it. It really just wasn't that good. A normal shockwave launcher, or even just a normal shockwave, was far superior if you're hoping to use it for mobility. And there's just so many better exotics in the loot pool right now, and I don't think anyone's sad to see this one go. At 30, we have hurdling. When hurdling was introduced, your character would automatically hop over low obstacles, which was a good idea in theory to make movement smoother, but a lot of the times you were accidentally hurdling without even trying to. And although this was a big feature with the new chapter, it was only in the game for 24 days because it was extremely inconsistent. It only ever worked a few times when you really wanted it to. You could easily get yourself eliminated by falling to your death by hurdling over your own builds. And there was also some weird bugs where sometimes your character would just get launched across the map once you started to hurdle. Hopefully they don't ever bring this one back, and if they do, they should give us the option to turn it off. At 29, of course, we have Eminem's RG minigun, another chapter 2 remix, but of course it was introduced 1 week into the season, and that season was only 28 days, so this one was only in for 23 days. A very cool version of the minigun that sang the lyrics to Rap God, which I thought was extremely hilarious and made it a lot more enjoyable to use, but then the season ended and it was removed. At 28, we have the Air Strike. In case you thought the mechs weren't strong enough to counter builds in Season X, Epic also decided to add more explosives to the loot pool, and it was pretty broken, especially at launch. It would call in 30 missiles, each dealing 75 damage and 200 structure damage, and it was only in the game for 22 days. They did end up bringing it back in Chapter 3 Season 2, but they made some adjustments that made it not as bad, and it was nowhere near as cinematic or as powerful as the Air Strike we have in-game right now. At 27, we have the Boom Billy. This was introduced in the Fortnite Chapter 5 Season 4. These were throwables that would chase players around and deal 75 damage once it got near enough to explode, and they were very slow, like extremely slow. You could see these coming from a mile away. You could literally walk away from them. They were kind of hard to find, and you could only carry 2 at a time, so it was kind of a waste of an inventory slot, and they only lasted for 21 days, and it's possible we won't see them again in the future because this was a part of a collaboration, but Billy was definitely a lot more scary in the movies compared to the actual Fortnite events. And another item we got during Fortnite was the chainsaw. These were actually extremely fun for mobility, and if you knew how to use these with the hover jets, the movement was absolutely broken. The sprint attack on it ended up being disabled before they were fully removed, which ended up nerfing the mobility a little bit, but it was removed alongside the Boom Billy after 21 days of being in the game. I can respect that using a chainsaw for movement was a unique idea, so Epic was definitely cooking with this one. At 25, we have the Legendary Tactical SMG. The Legendary version could only be obtained from the Stars and Starry Suburbs, a unique POI that was added during Season X of Chapter 1. Both Starry Suburbs and the Legendary TAC were only in the game for 18 days. It honestly wasn't that much crazier than the Epic version, but it did do a little bit more damage. And depending on your playstyle, you might have preferred to use the regular SMG that was in the loot pool. They did unvault the Legendary TAC for 14 days of summer in 2019 and in 2025, but we've seen much stronger SMGs ever since, so I doubt anybody is missing this one. At 24, we have the Kinetic Boomerang. Kinetic weapons were the main focus of Chapter 4. We got the Kinetic Hammer and the Kinetic Blade, and the Boomerang was to follow it up, and it did not deliver. The Boomerang could track players if your aim was close enough, and it only dealt 60 damage on impact. It was convenient to use against NPCs, so you can save your ammo, or hitting people that are gliding near you through the air, but it was not as practical in regular fights. There was just so many different types of weapons in the loot pool that were way better, and it was only in the game for 18 days. Then it was disabled for a month because there was an issue where players would lose control of their character after being rebooted, and it eventually did come back for a little bit, but even when it was in the loot pool, no one ever used this thing. At 23, we have the Ship in a Bottle. There isn't too much to say about this item. It was a part of the Pirates of the Caribbean collaboration. When you activated it, it would spawn a giant pirate ship, and it did a lot of damage to builds. But after players start to learn how to counter the item, it became pretty useless. I honestly didn't see many players using it outside of the first few days it was in the game, and it was a fun and unique looking item, and it got vaulted after 18 days. At 22, we have the Salvaged Brute. A lot of people started getting flashbacks when Epic decided to bring back the mechs at the end of Chapter 2, but there was only less than 3 weeks left in the season at the time, so Epic decided to bring them back. But the Salvaged Brutes were a lot weaker than the OG mechs from Season X. They had less HP, and you couldn't overcharge them for more like you could back in Season X, and you could actually sabotage other players using them by hopping in one of the seats and forcing itself to self-destruct. We did get to see all of the mech emotes again, which was nice. Overall, they were kind of useless with the nerfs though, and were only in for 18 days before getting vaulted again. At 21, we have Ice Spice Rifle and Grappler. Yes, these also got introduced in the Chapter 2 remix after a couple of weeks. They were only in for 16 days. The Grappler, honestly, it wasn't that great because it gave you the ice effect and it did have infinite uses, but it was kind of hard to use with the icy feet. It was kind of hard to control your character. The rifle was amazing. It was a version of the Sky's AR, but it also gave you the pepper effect, which made you run around a lot faster. So that was a huge win. And of course, once the season ended, these were both removed. At 20, we have the Chapter 6 Season 4 Medallions. The removal of these in normal BR was a huge community topic. And let's be be honest, when they first came out, they were way too strong. However, I do think that Epic might have nerfed them a little too much. Of course, there was the spring leg medallion, which lets you double jump and avoid fall damage, and then the surge medallion, which gave you movement speed and a sliding boost. But if you got both of these medallions together, you would have some insane movement, especially for zero build players. And the Carapace medallion also gave you 50 HP and 50 siphon for each elimination. These were only in BR for 15 days, and you can still find them in tournaments and in ranked mode. And at first I can understand the disappointment of having them removed, but I think with the skill gap on using the medallions, it kind of made sense to keep them out of casual BR. At 19, we have the Spire's Assassin Recycler. This was introduced during one of the most hated seasons in Fortnite, and it actually replaced the mythic Primal Shotgun, which was one of the most powerful shotguns in Fortnite. The Primal Shotgun was so insane, it had to be replaced with something that was very, very bad. It was a night and day difference. It was obtained by killing a Spire Guardian NPC, and it was only in the game for 14 days. And the normal Recycler is probably one of the most forgettable items in Fortnite, so the mythic version isn't much better. At 18, we have the Beast Pom-Poms. These were an absolute nightmare and very broken when they first came out, but that's not even the reason they were originally removed. They were taken out of the game after 2 weeks because there were so many bugs with them, including issues with health during the transformation, map exploits, and becoming invincible. And some people even had their skins straight up disappear when transforming. They did end up coming back, and by then players had learned how to combat these, but they were still kind of overpowered, especially if you didn't know what you were doing. At 17, we have Cupid's crossbow. This was added during Valentine's Day 2018, and low-key, it being in the game for 14 days was way too long because crossbows in general are just not strong in Fortnite unless you're just trying to trick shot or do it for the memes. Once the Valentine's Day event was over, Cupid's crossbow also left with it. And I'm not even kidding when I say you're better off just pickaxing somebody instead of trying to use one of these crossbows. At 16, we have Shadow Midas's drum gun. We've seen quite a few versions of the drum gun through Fortnite's history. This one wasn't as good as the original, but I'm not sure we'll ever see the original strength come back again. It had the same exact stats as the Jules drum gun, and just like the previous drum gun, it was better used as an SMG instead of a long-range weapon. It dropped from Shadow Midas when you eliminated him, and it had the shadowy effect on the gun that sometimes wouldn't show up properly in game, and it was only in the game for 13 days before it got vaulted. It was eventually added in creative in 2021, but this is just another gun that I'm not sure we'll ever see return to Battle Royale. At 15, we have Bender's Shiny Metal Ray Gun. It got introduced in Chapter 4, Season 3, and this was just a reskin of the mythic ray gun for their collab with Futurama. It did a little bit more damage to the old one, which was definitely noticeable, but it did take longer to reload, so it wasn't that crazy. And unless you're a zero build player or a fan of Futurama, you probably didn't really use this gun that much, mostly because it was released on the same day as the Mammoth pistol, which makes it very, very easy to overlook. It did have a lot of cool Easter eggs for fans of the show, and then it got vaulted after just 13 days. At 14, we have shopping carts. It's no surprise that players tried to break the first vehicle ever added into Fortnite. So much so that they actually had to disable them after just 13 days of them being in the game. Players were doing a glitch that would allow them to go under the map. Even though they were under the map, they'd still be able to shoot other players as well, giving them easy wins and eliminations. It was such a huge problem, Epic actually banned some of these players who were abusing this bug. There was a point where they almost decided to remove them completely because they wanted to protect the competitive integrity of the game. Luckily though, Epic was able to fix the issue, and they did eventually return back into BR. And at 13, we have Whirlpools. Speaking of glitches, if you didn't play in Chapter 2 Season 3, the map was completely flooded. So Epic added Whirlpools for mobility. You could enter them and they would shoot you up in the air just like a launch pad, and you can redeploy. They were really good for rotations around the map, but they didn't come without issue because players found a way to become completely invisible while using these. They caused Epic to have to act fast, and they disabled them after just 2 weeks. Epic did try to bring them back, but there were still too many issues, so they never returned. At 12, we have the Howler Claws. These were added during Fortnitemares back in 2022. You could find these holographic altars across the map. You could actually perform a dancing ritual to get the mythic Howler Claws. They were similar to the Wolverine Claws from the Marvel season, but you could also use the Wolf Sense ability to track players around you that were within 100 meters. The air slash ability could save you from taking fall damage or give you a little bit of extra mobility, and a lot of people didn't know you could use them to farm metal really quickly, especially if you were riding a wolf. The Howler Claws got disabled for a bit after just 4 days because players could use them to turn invisible. They fixed that issue and brought back the claws, but in total, they were only in the game for 11 days. At 11, we have Juice's Chug Cannon, the final boss exotic from Chapter 2 Remix, and it was a Chug Cannon that also gave you the low gravity effect. So not only was it useful for healing, it was also paired really well with shockwaves and other mobility items, and when you picked it up, it would play a part of Lucid Dreams, which I thought was really cool. They added it later in the season, so it was only around for 9 days before that season ended. Now, for the next few items on this list, they only lasted for a few days before Epic had to remove them. At 10, we have the Infinity Blade. OGs will remember the absolute chaos this weapon caused. This was actually the first mythic ever available in Battle Royale, and it was only in the game for 3 days. There were plans to nerf it and unvault it, but because of the backlash behind it, it looks like Epic just decided to keep it vaulted. You had to land on it and pull the sword out before you were killed by the rest of the lobby, but once you got it, you were almost unkillable. You even saw its true potential in the hands of Psalm during the Winter Royale, where we saw him go from 4 kills to 12 kills in a matter of a minute against some of the best players in the world. It remade an appearance in Blitz mode, but the original Infinity Blade will never return. At 9, we have sand tunneling. This was literally one of the main features of Chapter 2 Season 5, and it was only in the game for 2 days before getting disabled. There were so many glitches with this, where players would become desynced and be able to shoot from random locations, as well as some players becoming invisible. So it caused Epic a huge headache, and they had to disable it for a long time during the season. It did eventually return before the season ended, but it was kind of unfortunate because this was supposed to be a main feature, and we only got to use it for a few days. At 8, we have precision airstrikes. Although it was brought back a few days later, the airstrike was actually removed after just 1 day of it being in the game. Players found out that if you charged up the airstrike and quickly removed it from your inventory before it went off, you could keep using it and spam infinite airstrikes over and over for the rest of the game. I'm definitely not arguing that this glitch made it completely broken, but I am a little bit salty I didn't get the chance to try this myself because I would have done some bad things with this glitch. Thankfully, Epic acted quick and fixed it and brought it back into the game. At 7, we have Bud the Mushroom. A lot of items on this list were vaulted after getting a lot of backlash from the community, but a lot of people actually wanted to see this one in the game for a little bit longer. It was only in the game for 1 day. You had to emote in front of them and give them 100 wood, and the mushroom would grow and then follow you around after doing the floss emote. It would follow you around for up to 10 minutes and actually heal you when needed, and it made a return in Chapter 2 Season 8 but would no longer follow you or grant you any heals. This was likely early inspiration for the water sprites that we recently had. At 6, we have the Gray Bolt Action Sniper and the Gray RPG. No one really misses either of these. They were added back in Chapter 2 during the first 20 minutes of the game. They were just worse variants of better guns. We already see way too many gray versions of guns on the ground, and there just wasn't really any need for a Gray RPG or a Gray Bolt Action in the loot pool. And it looks like it was a complete accident. So Epic actually ended up removing them after just about 1 day of the season. At 5, we have the Shadow Stones. The Shadow Stones first showed up at the launch of Season 6, but it was only 12 hours before Epic had to vault them. Similar to sand tunneling, there were just unintended glitches and bugs that came with them. Players were able to turn completely invisible and allow players to still be able to use their weapons, so they didn't make a return until most of Season 6 had already passed. And when they were brought back at the end of Chapter 2, Epic kept having issues with them, so they ended up disabling them multiple times throughout that season. They were useful when they were used properly, but there was just way too many bugs, so they ended up getting removed. At 4, we have Doom Henchmen Give a Second Chance. This was actually a unique feature where after knocking one of Doom's henchmen, you could actually revive them and give them a second chance, and they would be recruited to your team. Sometimes they'd ask for a bear hug or a high five, and you'd also get an achievement called Change of Heart, which has to be one of the rarest achievements in Fortnite because after only 3 hours, this feature was completely removed. Players were running around with entire armies of henchmen, so it makes sense why they removed them, but I wish I also got to try this myself. Epic could have added like a cap on how many you could bring back, but they just ended up not bringing this feature back at all. At number 3, we have the Machine Pistol. The Machine Pistol was officially introduced in Chapter 3, but Fortnite accidentally released it multiple times. I actually got to use it for the first time during the unvaulted LTM in Chapter 2 Season 5, and it was accidentally re-released again 3 seasons later. It was first spotted in Season X as the only gray weapon in the solid gold LTM, and Epic quickly removed it after it was only in game for 1 hour. At number 2, we have the Zapatron. Of course, it has been reintroduced in OG, but when it first came out, it was only in the game for 30 minutes, and it was a complete accident that this got added to the loot pool. It was completely unbalanced, and it pretty much just came from Save the World. It could break builds with one shot. It could even one-shot players, and it just didn't fit with the flow of the game at the time, so it makes sense why they removed it. Like I said, they did end up bringing it back during Fortnite OG for a couple of weekends, but there were rumors that it was going to return during Chapter 3, and it never did. And for the last item on this list, we have the Eye of the Storm Tracker, which was only in game for 27 minutes. When you equip the Eye of the Storm Tracker, it would become your backbling. When you had it on, it would let you see on your mini map where the next zone would be. It was in the game for such a short time that there is barely any footage of it being used, and Epic accidentally added it into the game before it was fully finished, and it was never fully released. They did end up adding forecast towers though multiple seasons later, which would work similar to how the Eye of the Storm Tracker would work, but these weren't items. So adding an item that would take a whole inventory slot just didn't make much sense. So that is a list of all the items and features that were only in the game for 30 days or less, but I'm sure this list will grow longer the longer this game goes on. So thank you guys so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.